Neuroscientist and author Dr. Sarah McKay translates research into actionable ideas for people like you and me so we can live happier, healthier lives. Sarah, we're very excited to have you with us today.
Oh, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I think that brain, it's, as women, we often think about our bodies and how fit we are, but we don't necessarily go beneath the surface and start thinking about the health of our brains.
Yeah, I get that, and that's kind of why I wrote the book. And I think there's a bit of a misconception out there that our brains are separate from the rest of the body and the world around us, and really everything that we should be doing to take care of our brains is the same as what we're doing to take care of our bodies.
So that's one myth that's already been busted.
Yep.
So
Check that one off.
What are some ways that we as women can be, taking care of our brains and keeping them happier and healthier? I love the happier part as well.
Yeah, look, I like to think of brain health and to try and conceptualise it, because it's a really complex topic. I talk about taking care of yourself from the bottom up, so taking care of your biology, what food are you eating, are you exercising, are you getting enough sleep? That's a really important one. Taking care of your brain from the outside in, so what's happening in the outside world, your environment, are there stressful events happening out there that perhaps you need to be buffering? How well connected are you socially with other people, and are you respecting the light-dark cycle, getting enough sleep at night when you should be? And then taking care of our brain from the bottom down. So thinking about our thoughts and our feelings and our mindset, and it's just really kind of approaching our brain health from each of those bottom-up, outside-in and top-down ways.
In some ways, we might think that we just get the brain that we get. But as you're talking, and I know you've done research on neuroplasticity, it seems as though we can actually change what's happening with our brain. Can you just break that down for us?
Yeah, well, our brains evolved to be able to change and react and respond to all of the experiences we have. Especially when we're children, our brains are incredibly what we call plastic or malleable, or changed by the experiences around us. Now, the degree of plasticity kind of drops off a little bit as we get older. That just means it's harder for it to change, but it still always changes by the in response to the experiences we have in the world around us. So that's why it's quite nice to always try and ensure that the experiences that we have are positive, or we can put a positive spin on them, that we surround ourselves with good people, and that all goes to sort of shaping moulding our brains.
I feel like when I became a mum for the first time, something changed in my brain. I got more emotional. I'd cry more at movies. I'd cry at really silly things that I would never cry at before. Is that real?
Yeah, me too. Me too. And absolutely, there's this really interesting research that was published a couple of years ago looking at how the structure of women's brains changed during pregnancy. So brain scans were done before and after their first pregnancy, and a specific region of their brain shrunk. Now that sounds a little bit like, oh gosh, that's degenerating, but our brains often when they get a bit thinner, perhaps they're streamlining and they're getting better at particular functions. And the part of the brain that's streamlined in pregnant women is the part of the brain involved in empathy and social cognition and theory of mind. So being able to recognise the thoughts and feelings of other people. And in the case of a mum, that's anticipating her baby's wants and needs.
So there is such a thing as baby brain.
Well, your brain changes during pregnancy, but we don't have a lot of strong evidence that, certainly when women are brought into the lab and various cognitive tests are done on them, that they become, we don't become more forgetful. We don't necessarily become foggier during pregnancy. We think we do, but if we're getting enough sleep, our test scores don't match up. And look, I come from New Zealand, and we've got a Prime Minister over there who's doing quite well, thanks very much, despite pregnancy.
It's actually, you've mentioned in New Zealand, one of the studies that you did, that you mentioned in your book, was about this environment that children in high stress situation grew up in.
So I talk a lot about, I grew up in Christchurch in New Zealand, and it was kind of started about eight years ago now. A series of huge earthquakes absolutely devastated the city. And what people started noticing about 5 or 6 years after those earthquakes was children starting primary school who had been very, very young, who'd been babies or toddlers during the earthquakes, so had gone through incredibly stressful time in their lives, were suffering a lot of learning problems. They were highly anxious, they were very stressed. Now, older children seem to cope a little bit better, but certainly those very, very young children didn't seem to be coping very well. And it wasn't, because their mothers couldn't cope with the earthquakes. It just was an incredibly stressful time for everyone. And I think it just shows how important and how precious early childhood is, and what we can do, the best thing that we can do and what we know from the research is to put good, strong, grey matter infrastructure in around children. And that is strong social networks, good family support, good education, good social networks around those kids to help them through.
Often when women are pregnant, we go, don't upset her, make her stay calm. And then when we're pregnant, we worry that we're going to damage the baby because we're a little bit stressed.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that a reality?
I mean, if we're talking about excessive stress that perhaps comes from a natural disaster or some kind of trauma, that's no good. But there is some research, and I write about that in the book, that normal levels of maternal angst, the kind of worrying that you do when you're pregnant, is not going to harm the baby. Yeah, it's just best to avoid that excessive stress. And if women are in, a trauma environment or perhaps in a natural disaster, we need to again provide those social structures around them.
I want to come back to that sleep because I love my sleep. Tell me about sleep in your book.
Oh, look, I think it's one of the absolutely underestimated best things that we can do for our brains. I think getting a good night's sleep every night.
I hope my husband's watching this.
We all know what happens when we don't get a good night's sleep, and we spend a lot of our days in this modern world under-consuming natural light during the day, over-consuming artificial light at night, and not respecting the fact that, we live on a planet that has a light-dark cycle. And my other tip, and I think you might like this one, is trying to find time for an afternoon nap. If you get a bit sleepy in the afternoon, a 20-minute afternoon nap, it improves your memory and makes you a much nicer mum.
I wonder if our employer would allow that.
Oh, yeah, I think that they do have nap pods in different parts of the day.
I think they're inspired,
Well, it's interesting because I did watch your TED Talk about naps, and you were able to, do your entire TED Talk more or less about the power of the nap. And I was thinking to myself as a mom, like, where could I fit that time in? But you were saying that even our memories, or even the way that you did a study, or you talked about a study where people were reacting differently to emotions. Like their emotions were dialed down when they had a little bit of sleep.
Yeah, for sure. And certainly I talk about that kind of smooths off those rough emotional edges that develop during the day. And certainly for me as a mum, when my boys were little and they were at home with me every day before they started school, it made me a lot nicer to be around in the afternoon if I fitted in a 20-minute nap. And you can do that. And I also now that they're a little bit older, I still try and get to bed around the same time they do. I really do like my sleep. I get up really early in the mornings, but I'm often tucked up in bed by 8:30 or 9 with a good book.
Talking about emotions, what about teenagers? They're often labelled as being emotional and unpredictable.
Oh, I know. They get a bad rap, don't they, teenagers?
So tell us about their brain.
Well, look, we understand, and this is reasonably new research that's kind of come out in the last decade or so, that our brains don't just develop through childhood, they continue developing all the way through the teenage years, throughout adolescence, and really are still developing in our early and mid-20s. And so we understand, if we were to look at teenage girls, how they develop physically, they're a year or two ahead of boys. Boys kind of, develop a year or two later, and their brains are the same. The main part of the brain we see developing in teenagers is their prefrontal cortex, this part right at the front of the brain that's involved in judgment and planning and decision-making, emotional regulation, and also social cognition, so what's happening in the world around us with other people. Now, we tend to be very negative and deride those changes. All they care about is their friends, or they're highly emotional. But the brain is actually going through a process of learning at that point in time. When we go through these phases of development, these critical periods of development, it's when we're most receptive to learn. So that's when we should be teaching young people about emotional regulation. That's when we should be teaching them about understanding the thoughts and feelings of other people.
I guess the scary thing is if they're so plastic, they can also take on the negative impacts as well at that time.
Absolutely, and that's why, once again, and I think the most important thing we can do at any stage of life, whether it be, little 9-month-old babies or 19-year-olds, or, once we're, 29, 39, 99, is understand the importance of social cohesion and social bonds, the outside world coming in. That's one of the greatest buffers and greatest supports we can put into place.
As moms, we often think about, we have to think about our kids, about napping, so many things, and we often say that women are great multitaskers. Is this a myth, or is this...
Absolute myth.
No, come on.
No. There's No, I like to think about, if we talk about multitasking, we have to understand what it's doing. It's about attention. And I like to think of attention as being like a flashlight. You've got one beam of light, you can twist it, you can make it broad, you can make it narrow. You can't split the beam. And so if you're trying to multitask, what you're doing is you're switching your attention from task
So you're
to
actually
task.
multi-switching.
You're task switching. You can't split it. You can only go from one to the other. And what happens is your performance on both drops. And it's incredibly stressful. Our brains aren't designed. Our brains are designed for mindful unitasking, not for multitasking. It doesn't matter whether you're male, female.
So I don't
But
feel that bad now.
in our work, we often have to multitask, or as mums, we often do this, start cooking that, put the washing on the line.
Yeah, and we're not very good at any of it when we try and do it, are we?
Shona obviously is.
If we mindfully focus on one task at a time, we can put all of our attention on it, we can perform
But if
to
only our kids would
best.
allow us to do that.
Well, I know, yeah, I suppose it's finding those ways.
You know, we've talked a lot about, you know, the information that you have here in this book. We're giving away 5 copies of The Women's Brain by Dr. Sarah McKay. Email us at hello@mumsathetable.com and include the Women's Brain book giveaway in your email. That's hello@mumsathetable.com. The first 5 people to email us will get a copy. Now, if you'd like to continue the conversation, you can join us online on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, or on our website, mumsathetable.com. Dr. Sarah, I'd like to thank you for being here with us today. We really enjoyed talking with you and having this discussion about our brains and how, you know, we can even change certain things about them.
Oh, thanks for having me.